You can't help when you take a walk through this country feeling like everything's broken. Inflation is at a 40-year high. 1.5 million Canadians visited a food bank in a single month. In the GTA, the Greater Toronto Area, that number was 180,000 in one general metropolitan area. 1 in 5 Canadians are skipping meals because they can't afford their groceries, and about half of Canadians are $200 or less away from insolvency. The number of insolvencies is up by a fifth compared to a year ago, the biggest increase in 13 years. 1 in 6 businesses are considering closing their doors. Households now face the prospect of 15% of their income going to debt servicing alone, a recent record. Mortgage interest costs for the average family are up 11% year over year, the biggest increase since 1991. And if you do renew your mortgage today, after having secured it 5 years ago, you're paying about $7,000 more per year for the very same house that you lived in last year. And if you think home ownership is expensive, well, be careful about renting. That now costs $2,000 a month in the average Canadian city. Vancouver is the world's 3rd most inflated housing market, Toronto the 10th. In fact, Vancouver is more expensive than New York, Singapore, London, England, and countless other of the world's most famous cities where they have more people, more money, and less land. And if you took a walk out of your house onto the street, you would find yourself more in danger of being attacked. 32% more, in fact. That is the increase in the violent crime rate since this Prime Minister took office. In fact, there were 124,000 more crimes committed this year than in 2015 when the Prime Minister came to office. There were 788 homicides in Canada last year. That's up from 611 back in 2015, another 29% increase. 92% increase in gang-related homicides, 61% increases in the reports of sexual assaults since 2015. Police-reported hate crimes are up 72% over the last 2 years alone. This, after the government tells us it is investing so much of its rhetoric and its money in fighting racism. We see hatred and hate-based violence increase by 3/4. 31,000 Canadians lost their lives to overdoses. If you take a walk down streets like East Hastings in Vancouver, you will see tent cities where adults are laying face first on the pavement, having just completed their most recent dose, not sure whether they'll actually awaken, where police and social workers literally have to scour the streets 24/7 to check pulses of people lying on the pavement, not as extraordinary circumstances or one-time emergencies, but daily events. In fact, there were 71,069 Canadians who died of overdoses in 2021. 21 people are dying every single day of overdoses. That is up from 11 per day. More than 6 million Canadians do not have access to a family doctor. And now, the most simple expectations that we have for our health, like going into a pharmacy and getting painkillers for our children, has now become out of reach. Canadians are now forced to drive south of the border to get the same medications that are not available on this side of the border. In fact, according to an association of pharmaceutical wholesalers that represents businesses in 19 countries, only Canada is suffering from these shortages. You know, meanwhile, speaking of the rest of the world, there are still people who want to come here, and we hope they do. But 2.6 million of them are waiting in immigration queues. Over 1 million have been waiting longer than the acceptable wait time. And when they arrive, they would arrive in one of the worst-ranked airports on planet Earth at Pearson. Montreal is not far behind when it comes to records for delays. The Port of Vancouver is now ranked 376th out of 380 ports around the world. And speaking of getting people into the country, 10,000 Canadians were sent wrongly into quarantine by a $54 million app that we didn't need, that didn't work, and it could have been procured for $250,000. And speaking of building stuff, whether it's apps or anything else, our country is now ranked the second slowest for the time it takes to get a building permit. The average building permit takes over 250 days in Canada, but only 28 days in South Korea. No wonder we can't build the factories, the pipelines, and most important of all, the houses that give people homes. We import 130,000 barrels of overseas oil every day, even though we have the third biggest supply on planet Earth. All of these things are broken. And what's most interesting about them is that they all happened under the Prime Minister's watch while he refuses to take responsibility for any of them. I mean, any one of these things in isolation would be considered a catastrophic embarrassment. But together, they show the story of a country that can't get anything done, that has accepted dramatic reductions in its quality of life and its expectation for what a person can receive living in this country of ours. The Prime Minister, who is in charge of the central government, ought to take some responsibility, but he takes none. 40-year highs in inflation. Oh, he says it has something to do with the war between Russia and Ukraine, even though inflation was already 2.5 times the target before the war even began, and less than 0.3% of our trade is with Russia and Ukraine combined, and the stuff that they produce is stuff we already have here. He's not responsible for the massive increases in costs. He's not responsible, he says, for the doubling of house prices or the fact that rental costs are out of reach. He's not responsible for the skyrocketing crime rates in our streets, even though his government oversees the criminal code and the national police force and the border security. He's not responsible for the overdose deaths of so many Canadians. He's not responsible for the fact that so many are going to food banks. He's not responsible for the fact that our children can't get medication. He says he's not responsible, Madam Speaker, and he's right. He is not responsible.